News host Sean Hannity and former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort. But first, we are learning more tonight about President Trump's decision to call off a retaliatory strike against Iran after they shot down an unmanned U.S. drone near the Strait of Hormuz. Earlier today, President Trump sat down with our own Chuck Todd to discuss the situation with Iran.
I'm not looking for war, and if there is, it'll be obliteration like you've never seen before. But I'm not looking to do that. But you can't have a nuclear weapon. You want to talk good, otherwise you can have a bad economy for the next 3 years. Not as far as I'm concerned. No preconditions.
This morning, President Trump posted on Twitter, quote, "We were cocked and loaded to retaliate last night on 3 different sites when I asked how many will die. 150 people, sir," was the answer from a general. 10 minutes before the strike, I stopped it, not proportionate to shooting down an unmanned drone. I am in no hurry. Our military is rebuilt, new and ready to go, by far the best in the world. Sanctions are biting, and more added last night. We should point out, the Washington Post reported today the White House did not impose new sanctions despite that claim from the president. During that interview with Chuck Todd, the president also discussed his thinking when it came to calling off the strike.
So did you greenlight something, or had you said, if we do it, I'll do this? What was the order you gave?
Nothing is greenlighted until the very end because things change, right?
So you never gave a final order?
No. But we had something ready to go subject to my approval. And they came in, and they came in about a half an hour before. They said, "Sir, we're about ready to go." I said, "I want a better
planes
definition."
In the air? Were planes in the air?
We're about ready to go.
Yeah?
No, but they would have been pretty soon. And things would have happened to a point where you wouldn't turn back or couldn't turn back. So they came and they said, "Sir, we're ready to go. We'd like a decision." I said, "I want to know something before you go. How many people will be killed? In this case, Iranians." Mm-hmm. I said, "How many people are going to be killed?" "Sir, I'd like to get back to you on that." Great people, these generals. They said, came back, said, "Sir, approximately 150. And I thought about it for a second. And I said, "You know what? They shot down an unmanned drone, plane, whatever you want to call it. And here we are sitting with 150 dead people. That would have taken place probably within a half an hour after I said go ahead." Yeah. And I didn't like it. I didn't think it was proportionate.
And tonight, both the Washington Post and New York Times have published new reports within minutes of each other that shed some light on the president's decision. The Washington Post reports, quote, "Trump's initial public response was a tweet at 10:15 a.m. declaring that Iran made a very big mistake. Later in the morning, Trump gave the green light for the Pentagon to prepare for strikes after he was informed it would take military officials several hours to get everything in place. He had been briefed about casualties and other risks before giving the approval," officials said. And the New York Times reports that Trump had been speaking to Fox News host Tucker Carlson recently, quote, "While the president's national security advisors were urging him to order a military strike against Iran in retaliation for shooting down an unmanned drone, Mr. Carlson in recent days had told Mr. Trump that responding to Tehran's provocations with force was crazy. The hawks did not have Mr. Trump's best interests at heart," he said. And if he got into a war with Iran, he could kiss goodbye the idea of getting reelected. However, much weight that advice may or may not have had, the sentiments certainly reinforced the doubts that Mr. Trump himself harbored as he navigated his way through one of the most consequential foreign policy decisions of his presidency. Meanwhile, the dispute continues over whether the drone was shot down. Iranian state television released this video showing what they say are parts of the U.S. drone that were recovered. The U.S. says the drone was shot down in international airspace. Iran says the drone was in Iranian airspace. The United States has asked the United Nations Security Council to meet about Iran on Monday. Meanwhile, as tensions with Iran mount, it is important to point out it's been 6 months since former Defense Secretary James Mattis resigned. This week, Acting Defense Secretary Patrick Shanahan announced that he will be stepping down and taking his name out of consideration for the role of Pentagon chief. President Trump named Army Secretary Mark Esper to take over as Acting Secretary of Defense this week, and we learned tonight the president intends to formally nominate him for the post. Here for our leadoff discussion on a Friday night, Frank Figliuzzi, former FBI Assistant Director for Counterintelligence, Nayerra, former Obama White House Senior Director and former State Department Senior Advisor, and with me here in New York, Kristof, Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist for for the New York Times. Nick, let me start with you. The president saying in that clip we showed there he's not looking for war with Iran, apparently getting advice from Tucker Carlson saying, hey, if you've got war here, this is going to affect your re-election chances. If that strike had gone forward last night, what were the odds that that would have led to war with Iran as opposed to just being sort of a one-off tactical strike of the sort that we sometimes do see?
I think that, there seemed to be, the president and his advisors seem to be living in this fantasy world in which they take actions and Iran does not respond. And, in a major attack, this apparently involved 3 different sites, might have involved up to 150 casualties. Of course, Iran would have responded. It would have responded by killing Americans in Iraq, in Syria, elsewhere. It might have taken action against Saudi oil infrastructure, against traffic traveling through the Strait of Hormuz. There is a lot that Iran can do to create headaches, and that's why Joe Dunford, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, apparently was strongly resistant, trying to counsel them that it's not just what you would do; it's also what Iran does. And I'm glad that President Trump called off the strike, but the problem is that we remain on this collision path in this very, very dangerous situation without a lot of exit ramps on either side.
Well, so then the question becomes, look, the attack did not happen, obviously, Nayerra, but what message does Iran take from that? The fact that now we know, the president has said and explained the entire process from his vantage point, that he considered it, he was ready to do it, and then he backed off and didn't take action. What message do leaders in Iran take from that?
Yeah, it definitely comes across to folks in the Middle East and elsewhere in the world that Donald Trump choked at the key moment of making a decision that projected strength. And him and his national security advisor and the Secretary of State have ratcheted up the rhetoric to the point where it really almost was a red line and point of no return, waiting for that moment when Iran did something that would trigger a U.S. attack. There are several other options on the table. Diplomacy is one of the key options that has gone unexplored by the Trump administration. Glad that he didn't take that shot. It would have been disastrous for Americans' interest in the region and American troops overall, who are already depleted, war-weary from the 18 years in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq. But it comes across, unfortunately, overseas as the United States being incoherent and lacking strength.
So what are the consequences of that? If the Iranians look at this and say, Trump, this administration, the United States of America are incoherent and lack strength. Nick just laid out how escalation, in his view, might have resulted if there'd been an attack. If the interpretation is, as you're saying, practically speaking, what's Iran going to do because of that?
The irony is that Iran has never really been a good actor in the region. So they've struck out U.S. drones before. They've attacked oil tankers in the past, as far back as Ronald Reagan. It's a matter of how the U.S. responds. And not having a Pentagon briefing, for example, it's been more than 300 days since anyone has briefed from there. We haven't had a White House press briefing. So these leaks and rumors and the president effectively speaking off the cuff and making national security policy, people are taking their signals from wherever they can. And Donald Trump allowing John Bolton and Secretary of State Pompeo to box him in so early in the game made it very difficult to make this decision that ultimately was the right one.
John Brennan agrees with the point you just made, and obviously been a sharp critic of this president, this administration. But let's listen to what he said earlier today.
I've been a very tough critic of the Trump administration's policy toward Iran in terms of pulling out of the Iranian nuclear agreement, as well as this policy of economic strangulation, believing that Iran is going to go to its knees. But I do applaud Trump's decision not to carry out what would have been a disproportionate strike that would have led to about 150 or so fatalities, and that could have had a very dangerous escalatory spiral following it that could have brought that region to greater military conflict. So I do think that Trump recognized that he needed to explain to his critics exactly why he pulled back. And again, I give him credit, and I rarely do that, but I give him credit for being almost the adult in the room because of the war hawks like John Bolton and Mike Pompeo, who are pushing toward this confrontation that is not in anyone's interest, especially the United States.
So, Frank, and again, we've heard that response from a number of people, that ultimately the idea that this was a good thing, that it did not happen. But if there's a down drone, if Iran did down an American drone, what should the response be?
Well, first, I'm no apologist for Iran. They are a state sponsor of terrorism. They fund Hezbollah. The IRGC is responsible for death and terrorism around the world. But, you know, the president learned a new word, apparently, because we keep hearing it today. It's 4 syllables. He likes it. It's proportionate. So he's learned that a response needs to be proportionate. But you know what needs to be proportionate is a discovery of how we got to the brink of war yesterday. And what the response should be is an understanding that Iran feels threatened and cornered because the president tore up an agreement that by almost all accounts was in substantial compliance. Iran was complying. Our allies generally concur. The UN Security Council generally concurs that Iran was substantially in compliance with an agreement that President Obama approved. So how did we get here? President Trump tore it up, and now Iran feels threatened and is now feeling like they need to defend their economy and their existence. And this is at a time when there are pro-Western factions inside Iran that we need to court and cultivate. And the way to do that is not to get to the brink of war and paint America as the country that's about to attack. If we want to enable the pro-Western factions, we need to talk. A dialogue is necessary because, trust me on this, Iran can hurt us. This is not Iraq. This is not some other country. This is a country that has the capability to hurt us, and we need to call timeout and enter into a dialogue.
Well, so, okay, Nick, what would a way forward look like here? Because if this administration is not getting back into the Iran deal and there's no indication that's on the table here, then put that aside. No strike last night. What do you do now?
So there are a few things we can do. I mean, first of all, there is this basic dispute about where the drone was and whether it entered Iranian airspace. So we have to resolve that for the sake of the U.S. credibility and for the sake of justifying any kind of response. And that also has the benefit of delaying any immediate crisis. That should be verifiable. There's no excuse for not transparently explaining exactly where that drone was. Then I think we also need to make very clear to American commanders in the region that they are not to shoot except in the most extreme cases of self-defense or on orders of the president. One of the historic problems in this area, one that the U.S. Navy has been very concerned about, is some accident, some incident, hotheads, and perhaps provoked by the IRGC on the Iranian side, that just explodes and escalates. And every Iranian knows that in 1988, the U.S., mistakenly shot down an Iranian commercial plane with 290 people aboard that we mistakenly thought was an F-14. That just can't happen again. I think that we need to diffuse the tanker problem by telling other countries, look, these tankers are taking oil to your countries. You need to step up. You need to help protect them. That also makes it an issue between a multilateral issue, not just between the U.S. and Iran. I think that will help. And look, at the end of the day, it's going to be difficult, but I think we have to initiate secret diplomacy and try to patch up the nuclear accord, perhaps with face-saving measures on each side that will allow everybody to claim triumph. But at the end of the day, President Trump has been very successful in tactics that have created pain in Iran. Those tactics, though, haven't been harnessed to any strategy, and so aside from inflicting pain on Iran, they have simply pushed Iran closer to a nuclear program. They've antagonized allies. They've created more insecurity. What we need is a strategy to be attached to those tactics.
And Nayyera, everything that's coming out and that we're learning through this reporting about the decision-making process yesterday, and the president sort of, apparently being of two minds, at alternate times on this. What's your confidence level that he has landed in a position he's going to stick with now versus the possibility that a week or two or in the not-too-distant future, he takes a different posture here when it comes to Iran and force?
Now, this Iran question is certainly not solved for this administration. They're going to the UN on Monday, and we'll see how they pitch this battle or rhetorical battle with Iran at the UN Security Council, where, frankly, those are the signatories to the Iran deal. Russia, China, Germany, other allies in Europe. The people that Trump is looking to satisfy, or that Bolton is looking to satisfy in the region by fighting their war for them, Israel and Saudi Arabia are not watching out for American interests at this point. So understanding what Trump thinks are U.S. interests, luckily we know that indiscriminately killing people, he seems to agree that that is not in U.S. interest. But does he think that regime change is going to advance U.S. objectives? Does he think that nuclear deterrence through diplomacy is the best way to advance U.S. objectives? We don't know what the theory of the case is for this administration in dealing with Iran, and that's the most problematic part of where we are right now.
And Frank, from Iran's standpoint, what are the next moves to look for here?
Well, we need to see. They're going to take a while, scratch their heads, and figure out what this president really described. What he told Chuck Todd simply scares a lot of people because it doesn't ring true with how execution orders are given for airstrikes. It just doesn't. So Iran's got to figure out, is he playing a game with us? Is he trying to come across as the peacekeeper in his administration? And that's a dangerous game to play with Iran. I predict they're going to keep at it. We're going to see more activity to block the international transport of oil. They're fighting for the survival of their economy. They're not going to back down. This will be continued.
All right, Frank Figliuzzi, Nayerra, and Nicholas Kristof, thanks to all of you. And coming up,